Shvisas also perik beis Halacha Zayin. If he ate something that was roasted together with salt, Mistav HaMelech Labosa. The melech adds to the size of the meat to get to the shiur of a keseva. So we go down to the Peirush. My Mishnah cites in Yuma 80b that the salt adds to the meat. Rae Gann writes that what's it telling us? That even though salt is not edible by in and of itself, since you eat it with something else, it adds to the measure. Rae Gann explains umtza, it means raw meat. Halacha, they point out the Rambam says shlit. He doesn't mention raw meat. The Gemara uses the language umtza. Seeing that the Rambam interprets umtza as being something that cannot be eaten, therefore one is not liable for it. Of any questions in Hilchos Shabbos, he permits one to move raw meat because it's usable for a person. And the question is, if it's not edible, how is it usable? It must be that it can be eaten, and he doesn't have an answer for that on the Rambam. Siach Yitzchak also points this out in the Rambam, and he explains that the text of the Rambam was like the text that we find in the Maggid Mishnah in Agos Maimonides, the umtza the milcho, and not umtza umilcho. It means meat, and what does it mean? Meat that was salted and it wasn't yet rinsed. And then questions the Rambam, it's also to eat it because the blood is on the salt. Therefore, he has to explain that it's talking about where he roasted it, because when you roast, you also put a bit of salt on it. And by roasting, you do not have to remove the blood that the salt pulls out into itself, because the fire pulls it out of the salt, and you can eat the salt. As we learn in Hilchos Machon Nesher is that by roasted meat, you salt it and you roast it right away. Roasted shlit is called umtza. If we'll eat live meat, it will also be chayav, but the Rambam is talking about that it is roasted to tell us that the melech can be eaten as well, even though it had blood in it at one point. Tzir shal gabi yerek, the moisture that's on a vegetable, mitzaref. In other words, you make a dip, as we had before. That you use the salt, water that you use to pickle, adds to the vegetable. Because whenever you mix foods together, it makes it one unit. Even though it's also a liquid in a food, it's not all food items. In Yuma we learned from Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish said, this is 80b, the moisture, the liquid that's on the vegetable adds to the measure of a Shvisas Yom HaKippurim, and not liquid. Even though before we learned that food items and liquid measures do not go together, here the Rambam explains that if it's made specifically, if the liquid you dip into the liquid to make the food edible, and it's considered the main item is the food, but the measure is the kesevas. And Rashi explains over there that liquid which comes to sweeten the food is considered food. In Rashi we find two explanations. Are we talking about the salt water that comes out from a soup, or the dips that they used? Siach Yitzchak writes, it was in the agreement of all the codifiers is like the second Peirush, the second explanation of Rashi. It's talking a dip, and even though it's not considered a food item, since when he takes it, mind is put at ease, he's liable. Because the whole, as we've learned throughout, the main purpose is that he should be in a state of being unhappy with the fact that he hasn't eaten. But other foods and drinks do not add together for a shiur, because the Chachamim have this accepted knowledge that a person's mind is not set at ease. The Chachamim have this fact that it cannot be, his mind will not be put at ease by half a measure of food and half a measure of drink. Hoya sheva soiveam sheva machos gase sheochal ochal ad shekot b'mezoinoi. If he was soivea, he was satiating himself from achila gasa, from overeating. In other words, Erev Yom Kippur he ate until he can't eat anymore. Now he went into Yom Kippur and ate more than one can eat. He's potter. He's not liable. Just as somebody would eat food that is not a food item. Even though if a person would be desperately hungry, dying of hunger, he would eat it. It's not usually, most people do not become satiated from it. Now the later commentaries point out that the Rambam says that overeating is like eating something that's not edible. Therefore, he would get malchus. He would though be punishable for overeating, just like he would be punishable rabbinically with rabbinical lashes for eating something which is not edible, as we explained in Halacha Hey. Rashi in Yuma 80b explains that if he was satiated from the meal, from the Suda, as we translated earlier, that he ate a lot, he consumed right at the last meal, and everything that he ate afterwards in Yom Kippur was considered overeating. But the Kolboy explains that he ate on Yom Kippur itself food that cannot be eaten, which caused him to be satiated, and then he ate on top of that food which is edible, but he's now having overeaten. It's not considered eating. And Siach Yitzchak writes, in the name of the Ma'aser Keach, the Giyasa, the true text in the Rambam should be, if he was satiated from having eaten a lot, that he ate things that are not edible, and then afterwards he ate things that are edible on top of that, he's potter. That's like the second explanation of the Kolboy that we mentioned above. Rabbi Manoach writes that the two explanations in the Rambam are correct, la halacha. It doesn't matter whether he was continuing on from the meal of Yom Kippur and he's eating continuously, or if he ate food which made his stomach unable to accept more, and he keeps on eating, he would not be liable for Yom Kippur. What's the reasoning of why he would not be liable? The Gemara says, because it says lo su'una. He will not torment himself. It doesn't mean that he damages himself. And Rashi explains, when a person overeats, it actually is something which the body is not able to handle, and it damages, and therefore it's not called eating. In Hilchos Yom, the Rambam writes that if he was satiated and he didn't want to eat, and he added by eating truma, he does not pay the fifth. It says ki yochal, and not he should to hurt himself. As the Rambam explains that the reason for your potter from the extra fifth that you have to pay usually when you eat a kohen's truma, in addition to the actual payment for the value, and the reason you're is because you're hurting yourself. By Yom Kippur, he doesn't say because you're hurting yourself. It's like he ate food that is not edible. Rebbe Yehuda writes on this halacha that Rambam also intended to explain what the Gemara says, that it is damaging. Why he says it's considered like eating something, foods that are not edible, is only to make it more visually understood to the person that it's similar to eating without having benefit.